Barcelona, October 1987. The Grand Théâtre del Liceu, one of Europe's most prestigious opera houses, stood illuminated against the Mediterranean night like a jewel box made of marble and gold. Inside its ornate walls, where Wagner and Verdun had echoed for over a
Gecenin
century, something
sessizliğinde
unprecedented was
birlikte
about to happen.
sakin,
Two
Bu
voices were
anı
going to
yaşa
meet that had no business
sonsuza
being in the
dek.
same room together. One trained in the rigorous discipline of classical opera, shaped by decades of technique and tradition. The other forged in the rebellious fires of rock and roll, built on instinct and theatrical excess. Montserrat Caballé, the legendary soprano whose voice had brought audiences to tears in every major opera house on earth, stood backstage adjusting her gown and trying to calm nerves she hadn't felt in 30 years of performing. And Freddie Mercury, the rock god who'd commanded stadiums full of screaming fans, paced in his dressing room, feeling like a terrified student about to audition for a teacher whose approval might forever remain out of reach. They were about to record together, an album that music critics would call either genius or sacrilege, depending on whether they believed that opera and rock could coexist without destroying each other. But the real story, the one that would echo far beyond that Barcelona recording studio, wasn't about musical fusion. It was about what happens when two completely different worlds recognize the same hunger in each other, the same desperate need to create something beautiful even when your body is starting to fail you. Because both of them were hiding secrets that autumn. Secrets about mortality, about time running out, about making art matter before the final curtain fell. London, 1983, 4 years before Barcelona. Freddie Mercury sat alone in his Kensington home at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, flipping through television channels looking for something, anything, to quiet the restlessness that always found him in the dark hours. Then he heard it, a voice that made him freeze with his finger hovering over the remote control. It was coming from a BBC broadcast of Puccini's Turandot, performed at Covent Garden. The soprano singing in Questa Regia had a voice that seemed to contain entire universes, power and delicacy, strength and vulnerability, technical perfection wrapped in raw emotion. Freddie turned up the volume and sat transfixed as Montserrat Caballé commanded the stage with nothing but her voice and presence. No pyrotechnics, no elaborate costumes or theatrical excess. Just a woman standing in a spotlight, opening her mouth and making the entire world disappear except for the sounds she was creating. "My God," Freddie whispered to his empty living room. "That's what I've been trying to do my entire life." Because here was the thing that most people didn't understand about Freddie Mercury. Underneath all the flamboyance and rock star bravado, underneath the leather and sequins and theatrical posturing, he was a student of the human voice, a scholar of what the human instrument could accomplish when pushed to its absolute limits. He'd been classically trained on piano as a child in India. He knew music theory, he understood composition, harmony, the mathematical precision that underlies all great art. Rock and roll had been his rebellion, his escape, his way of surviving in a world that didn't know what to do with someone like him. But opera was his first love, his secret passion, the art form that reminded him that the human voice, trained and pushed and wielded with skill, could accomplish things that guitars and drums could never touch. The next morning, Freddie called his manager. "Find out everything you can about Montserrat Caballé," he said, "where she's performing, how to contact her." "Everything. Why?" his manager asked, confused. "Are you thinking about going to an opera?" "No," Freddie replied. "I'm thinking about creating one." It took 2 years of careful planning, of intermediaries and introductions, of building courage to approach someone he considered musical royalty. But finally, in 1985, Freddie sent a letter to Montserrat Caballé's management. The letter was unlike anything her team had ever received. Not a request for an autograph, not a gushing fan letter, but a serious, thoughtful proposal from one artist to another. "Dear Madame Caballé, my name is Freddie Mercury. I'm the lead singer of a rock band called Queen, and I'm writing to you because I believe we could create something extraordinary together. I know this seems unlikely. I know our worlds are supposed to be separate, that classical music and rock and roll are supposed to exist in different universes that never touch. But I've spent my entire life believing that the best art happens when you refuse to accept those boundaries. Your voice has haunted me for 2 years. Since that night when I heard you sing Puccini, and realized that you were doing something I've spent my whole career trying to accomplish, turning technical perfection into emotional transcendence. I want to write music for your voice, not opera, not rock, but something new, something that honors what you can do while creating space for what I do. I want us to prove that beauty doesn't belong to just one genre, one style, one acceptable way of creating art. I know you have no reason to say yes. I know I'm asking you to risk your reputation by working with someone from a completely different musical world, but I'm asking anyway because I know that we could create something that matters. Your admirer, Freddie Mercury, Montserrat Caballé, received hundreds of letters every year. Fan mail, collaboration requests, business proposals. Most went unanswered. Most were filtered by her management team and filed away. But this letter was different. This letter reached her directly, passed along by a curious assistant who thought it might be interesting. And when Montserrat read it, sitting in her dressing room between performances in Vienna, something unexpected happened. She smiled, because here was someone from a completely different world, speaking to her not as a fan begging for attention, but as a fellow artist recognizing something essential. Someone who understood that the voice, the human voice in all its possibility, was sacred regardless of the genre it was employed in. Set up a meeting, she told her manager. I want to meet this Freddie Mercury. March 1986. A quiet restaurant in Barcelona. Montserrat Caballé arrived early, which was unusual for her. But she was curious, nervous even. What did a rock star want from her? What kind of collaboration could possibly work between their vastly different styles? When Freddie Mercury walked in, dressed elegantly but simply, no costume, no performance, she was struck first by his eyes. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen things, who'd lived too fast and loved too hard and carried secrets that weighed more than they should. They were also the eyes of a genuine fan, someone who looked at her with reverence that had nothing to do with status or celebrity and everything to do with artistic respect. Madame Caballé, Freddie said, and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he took her hand and kissed it formally. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I know you're taking a risk, even being seen with a rock musician. Montserrat laughed, a warm, genuine sound. Darling, I've spent 40 years having people tell me what I can and cannot do. I'm far too old to start listening now. They talked for 4 hours, about music, about technique, about the impossible standards both of them held themselves to, about the loneliness of being at the top of your field with nowhere left to climb, about what it meant to be a performer in an industry that wanted to categorize you, limit you, make you fit into boxes that were far too small. Why me? Montserrat asked at one point. There are many opera singers, many with voices as good as mine. Why did you want to work with me specifically? Freddie didn't hesitate, because when I heard you sing, I heard someone who understood something I've spent my whole life trying to articulate. That technical perfection without emotional honesty is just noise. And emotional honesty without technical skill is just screaming. He leaned forward, his intensity suddenly visible. You do both. Every time you open your mouth, you do both. That's not talent, that's genius. That's what I want to learn from you. Montserrat was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised even herself. I'll do it. Whatever you want to create, I'll do it. The recording sessions for what would become the Barcelona album began in the fall of 1987. They took place in a converted monastery outside Barcelona that had been turned into a state-of-the-art recording studio, ancient stone walls surrounding modern technology, the past and future existing in the same space. Freddie had composed the title track specifically for Montserrat's voice. He'd studied her recordings obsessively, learned the exact range and timbre of her instrument, crafted melodies that would showcase her operatic power while leaving room for his rock sensibilities. The first day of recording, Montserrat arrived to find Freddie already there, pacing nervously, smoking his 5th cigarette of the morning, even though it wasn't yet 9 a.m. Darling, you look like you're about to face a firing squad, she observed. I might as well be, Freddie admitted. Do you know how many people told me this wouldn't work? That I'd embarrass myself trying to write for an opera voice? That I should stick to what I know? And yet here you are, Montserrat said, not sticking to what you know. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Freddie replied. Sometimes they're hard to tell apart. But when they began recording, when Montserrat's operatic soprano met Freddie's rock tenor in the soaring harmonies of Barcelona, something magical happened. It worked. Against all odds, against all conventional wisdom, against every rule about how music was supposed to function, it worked. Montserrat's voice provided the foundation. Pure, powerful, technically flawless. And Freddie's voice wove around hers like ivy around marble. Less technically perfect, but emotionally urgent, adding rock's rebellious energy to opera's classical discipline. The recording engineers watched through the glass, many with tears in their eyes, as two completely different traditions merged into something new, something that honored both worlds without diluting either. "This is impossible," one engineer whispered. "This shouldn't work." "And yet it does," his colleague replied. "That's what makes it art." What the recording engineers didn't know, what almost no one knew during those sessions, was that both Freddie and Montserrat were fighting private battles that made every note more precious. Freddie had been diagnosed with HIV 2 years earlier. He hadn't told anyone except his closest circle, but his body was starting to show signs of the disease's progression. Weight loss he couldn't explain away. Exhaustion that no amount of rest could cure. A persistent cough that he tried to hide behind cigarettes and casual dismissal. And Montserrat, legendary, seemingly invincible Montserrat, was dealing with her own health crisis. Heart problems that her doctors had warned her about. Warnings to slow down, to stop performing, to accept that even the greatest voices eventually wear out. Neither told the other. Both pretended they had all the time in the world. But they knew. Artists always know. They can see mortality in each other's eyes because they have learned to look for it in their own mirrors. So they worked with an urgency that everyone attributed to artistic passion, but was really about something more fundamental. The desperate need to create beauty while you still can. December 1988. La Scala in Milan, the most prestigious opera house in the world, agreed to host a special charity concert featuring Montserrat Caballé and Freddie Mercury performing selections from the Barcelona album. The proceeds would go to AIDS research and classical music education programs. Two causes that seemed to have nothing in common, but were united by a simple truth. Both were underfunded, both were stigmatized, both desperately needed support. The opera establishment was scandalized. La Scala, hosting a rock star? Unthinkable. Degrading, a betrayal of classical music's sacred traditions. But Montserrat refused to back down. "Freddie Mercury has done more to bring opera to young people than 1,000 traditional performances," she told the press. "If we want classical music to survive, we need to stop acting like it's too precious for ordinary people to touch." The concert sold out in 48 hours. Tickets that normally went to wealthy patrons were bought by teenagers who'd never heard opera except through Freddie's voice. Classical music fans who'd never listened to rock came curious about what Queen's frontman could possibly offer. What they witnessed that night became legendary. Freddie, dressed in an elegant suit rather than his usual theatrical costumes, stood beside Montserrat on La Scala's historic stage. Two figures representing completely different musical traditions, united by mutual respect and the belief that art could bridge any divide. When they began singing Barcelona, something extraordinary happened. The opera purists who'd come prepared to be offended found themselves crying. The rock fans who'd never heard opera before heard Montserrat's voice and understood suddenly what their hero had been trying to tell them about the power of the human voice. And in the audience, music critics who'd dismissed the collaboration as a publicity stunt began frantically rewriting their reviews. Because what they were witnessing wasn't fusion or crossover or any other diminishing label. It was transcendence, pure and simple. The Barcelona album eventually raised millions for AIDS research and classical music education. The concerts that followed, small, intimate performances in venues that ranged from opera houses to modern theaters, introduced opera to audiences who'd never considered it accessible. But more than the money, more than the album sales or the awards, what Freddie and Montserrat created was something more fundamental. They proved that art doesn't belong to anyone. Not to classical purists who want to keep it locked away in pristine concert halls. Not to rock fans who think anything that came before rock and roll is irrelevant. Art belongs to anyone brave enough to create it and generous enough to share it. In 1991, when Freddie died, Montserrat was devastated. She released a statement that captured what their collaboration had meant. Freddie Mercury taught me that respect for tradition and courage to break tradition are not opposites. They're partners. He showed me that the human voice, whether trained in opera houses or forged in rock clubs, is always sacred, always worth honoring. She performed Barcelona at the 1992 Olympics opening ceremony, a tribute to her friend, a reminder that his vision of music without borders had touched the world. And the Mercury Phoenix Trust, established after Freddie's death, continued the work they'd started together, funding AIDS research, supporting music education, proving that generosity and art could work together to change the world. Montserrat served on the trust board until her own death in 2018. Every year she'd tell the story of meeting Freddie, of the letter that had started it all, of the unlikely collaboration that became one of the most beautiful friendships of her life. He didn't want to be an opera singer, she'd say. He wanted to show people that beauty has many voices, that you don't have to choose between loving opera and loving rock, that the human voice in all its forms is miraculous. That's what Freddie gave the world, not just music, but permission. Permission to love what you love without apology. Permission to create without asking permission. Permission to believe that different traditions can make each other stronger instead of weaker. Today, Barcelona is considered one of the most successful classical crossover recordings ever made. It's played in opera houses and rock venues. It's studied in music schools as an example of how to honor tradition while breaking rules. But the real legacy isn't the album. It's what the album represented. Two artists at the peak of their powers, both fighting private battles with mortality, choosing to spend their remaining time creating something generous and beautiful. Choosing to prove that music doesn't have borders, that respect and rebellion can coexist, that opera and rock aren't enemies. They're different languages saying the same thing about what it means to be human. Freddie Mercury and Montserrat Caballé came from different worlds. They shouldn't have worked together. Every conventional wisdom said their collaboration would fail, and yet they created something that outlived them both. Something that still makes people cry, still inspires young musicians, still proves that the bravest thing artists can do is trust each other enough to create something new. That's the real story of Barcelona. Not fusion, not crossover, not compromise. Just two voices recognizing each other across the divide of tradition and technique and choosing to sing together anyway. Choosing to prove that beauty, real beauty, doesn't ask permission. It just opens its mouth and sings.